In this video I'm going to show you a very exciting game from the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis. It's the game Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces, world's number 2, playing against the tournament leader Wesley So. And Wesley So is in great shape. He has managed to win 2 of his games, making some draws as well. So with this excellent result, he is performing that well that he is in contention still for a qualification spot for the candidates tournament, which is taking place next year in April. But first things first, he is playing with the black pieces against Fabiano Caruana, and this is a big game and you will enjoy it because some very exciting tactics are happening. So let's dive straight into the action. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more than only Hans Niemann's his best games. There's much more to discuss on the channel Robert Rist Chess. So here we go. It's d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, the Nimzo Indian, and Fabi goes for the move e3. It's the so-called Rubinstein variation. And after the move c5, knight ge2, overprotecting the knight on c3, black plays here the move d5. And it's a kind of a sideline, this particular setup in the Rubinstein variation with the knight on e2. And well, here white played the move a3, questioning this bishop on b4. But this doesn't come as a surprise at all to Wesley So. In fact, he popularized this particular variation with the black pieces, as earlier in January he played this particular system with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen, and also a few days later in an online game against Fabiano Caruana. So that's a very nice coincidence. In both of these games he decided to trade off the bishop for the knight, and after knight takes c3, I mean, it's much easier for white to complete development. Now the latest trend here is to drop back with the bishop to a5 to maintain this pin, making it harder for white to complete its kingside development. But drawback is that the pawn on c5 can be taken. Well, this is still theory. Black takes the pawn on c4, and of course there's this option now to go for the exchange of queens. But fortunately for you, for every chess fan, Fabi doesn't go for that move, which is not bad, but with bishop d2, you're keeping queens on the board, keep more play into this position. Black played the move knight bd7 as he's about to take the pawn on c5. Maybe the knight can even come to d3 later. Anyway, knight g3 is played. It's a typical move, so you're opening up the path for the bishop to take on c4. And here, interesting moment. This is actually very important to discuss this with you a little bit, because you would expect here this move, knight takes c5, which was not played in the game. We will get back to the game very soon. But there's bishop takes c4, and after the trading off both pawns on the c-file, here you see that both the bishop and the knight are kind of vulnerable. There's this threat of playing b4, and there's not the possibility to give a check on d3. That would be a huge blunder, because there's bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, and with the help of a double attack, white is actually winning the bishop on a5. Therefore, there's still some theory here. You should drop back with the bishop to c7 with a playable but slightly passive position for black. Wesley So thinks that he can solve its problems in a different way, and he decides to play here this move, b6. So what he wants is get rid of this pawn and just be able to recapture with a piece on b6 very soon. But it's an ambitious move, and don't forget that this bishop on a5 doesn't have that many squares to go to. And Fabi played here the critical move, queen f3, hitting the rook in the corner. And there are only 2 ways of dealing with that threat. It's either moving the rook to b8, which is played in the game, or play here the move bishop a6, which seems very interesting, because now the rook is protected by the queen, bishop protects the pawn on c4, but the problem is it runs into this move, b4. When the bishop on a5 is trapped, you cannot take en passant, because that runs into bishop takes a6 and white is a piece up. So therefore, Wesley So played here this move, rook to b8. So the rook is ready to join the open file. If you get a chance, then probably black is going to take with the pawn on c5. But here, white played the move c6, attacking this knight on d7. And the knight goes to e5 to attack the queen. And after this move, queen to f4, you would expect here this knight to move again. taking the pawn on c6, which is probably what black should have done. In the game there followed bishop takes c3. That's not the kind of move you would like to play, giving up the bishop for a knight in an open position. But let me show you, if you take with a knight on c6, the rook is defended now, so the white queen cannot take the rook here. But there's queen takes c4, attacking the unprotected knight on c6. And if you protect it with the move bishop b7, then there's b4 again, and this bishop is trapped. The only way to avoid the loss of a piece here is to play b5, to set up a counterattack against the queen. And after taking that pawn, the bishop can now move to b6, but your pawn down without any compensation. So that explains that Wesley So wants to take first on c3. But now after bishop takes c3, black is under pressure. There's a lot of play on this diagonal. Black takes the pawn on c6. And there is the move rook to d1. The rook joins play, pressurizing the queen on the d file. Various possibilities here, but you don't want to play a move like bishop d7. And the bishop is kind of stuck on the d file. Also a move like knight d5 is not very great. There's queen g4, and the pawn on g7 is in trouble. So black played here the move queen to e7. For the moment, everything is still protected, but white regains the pawn by taking on c4. I like these two bishops. They are putting pressure on black's position, but there's another idea, because black has a huge problem here. He wants to castle kingside, but there's a good reason Wesley So didn't play this at all, because there is the move bishop to b5. White is about to take on c6, and if you just recapture one possible way, I mean, you first have to defend it, of course. After that, the rook on b8 is hanging. The trick is, if you protect here with the move bishop to b7, there's bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6. Now the knight is traded off, and white has this move, bishop to b4. And after moving the queen away, the rook on f8 can be taken. White is winning the exchange. That's the main idea. So if you cannot castle kingside here, you're not able to bring your king into safety, you have a big problem. Wesley So played here the move b5. He's attacking the bishop on c4. It's protected by the rook on b8. And you understand that if the bishop goes away, then probably black does get a chance now to castle kingside. But rather than moving that bishop away, they follow this move, bishop takes f6. That is a very nice move, a move maybe which might have been underestimated or simply overlooked by Wesley So. Because why is this so strong? You're trading off that bishop, that wonderful bishop, for that knight. Black has two possible recaptures. If you take back with the g-pawn, now you're not going to move the bishop, but you will play here this move, knight to e4, setting up a huge threat by landing on d6. Or if black is just taking the bishop, then you're going to take with your knight on f6 with check. Black doesn't have that many options. He has to give up its queen because the rook is covering the d file, and if the king comes to f8, it's queen h6 with checkmate as the knight takes away the remaining squares. Therefore, black has to take back with the queen, offering the exchange of queens. If queens will come off the board, black is sort of okay, I would think. But white has a different idea in mind and played here the move queen to d6. So that if you take the bishop, then white is going to take that knight on c6 with check. You cannot block on d7 with the bishop because the rook is also covering the d7 square. And if you play king f8, there is queen to d6 with the double attack. White is picking up the rook. Back to the game. After queen d6, the knight is hanging, as we can see. Black played here this move, e5. Advancing the pawn opens up the 6th rank, so the queen indirectly protects that knight on c6 and in the meantime offers the exchange of queens. I think Wesley So had been calculating up till here and believed that maybe he can try to escape to an inferior queenless middle game. But here Fabi came up with a brutal idea of sacrificing his bishop on f7 with check. And what is the idea of this move? Well, if you do take back with the queen, there is queen takes c6. White has won a pawn. Look at this king, it's wide open. The knight can come into the attack as well. You can castle next. So you're pawn up with a fantastic position. That's not a serious option. So therefore, black decided to take with the king. But now there's this fantastic idea of queen c7 check. Because for the moment, everything is still defended in black's camp. But the king is in deep trouble. If the king goes to g6, it's rook d6, pinning the queen. And after bishop e6, queen takes c6, white regains the material. That's not a good move, king g6. If you play here the move knight e7 to block the check, then your rook is no longer defended. It's queen takes b8 and white is up in exchange. So therefore, Wesley So played the move queen to e7, but now the knight can be taken anyway. So here we see that with a nice little tactic, black can no longer castle, white is super active and has a beautiful piece configuration, has won back its material and is even a pawn up. Bishop b7 played, attacking the queen. There followed queen takes b5 and now it's bishop takes g2. Hitting the rook on h1 but also opening up the b-file. So both the queen and rook are under threat. The only move here, it was of course seen in advance by Fabi, is queen c4 with a counter check. What should black do? Well, the king went back to f8. I mean, you don't want to come forward with your king. Also blocking with the queen on e6 is not good because of rook d7. The rook cannot be taken because of the pin. If the king comes to f6, then another piece joins the attack with tempo. It's knight h5 check. You got to keep the queen defended, but there's knight takes g7 with a knight fork. White wins the queen and the game. So therefore, king f8 was played. And here, of course, you can just move your rook to g1. There's nothing wrong with such a move to attack the bishop. But in the spirit of such an open position, playing against the exposed king, every tempo matters. And rather than moving the rook, knight f5 is played, attacking the queen. The queen went to f6 and now white also doesn't move the rook. Played here the move queen c5 check. That's another very good move. The king goes into the corner, king g8. And there is queen c7 with a counterattack. You're hitting this rook in the corner. Black's position is really bad, and that bad that Wesley So had seen enough. He resigned here because if you put a rook on f8, for instance, looking for counterattack, let's say if the knight goes away, then it's mate on f2. So you got to be careful. But there is rook d7, which is the absolute killer. After queen takes f5, rook takes g7 is checkmate. So the knight cannot be taken. But you can also not take the rook on h1 because of rook takes g7, queen takes g7. Checkmate as the knight protects the queen. Therefore, instead, another move had to be fine. Well, Wesley didn't want to go that far. He resigned, as I said. But if you put a rook on e8, for instance, then even a move like knight d6 is just really good. You're attacking that rook on e8. If you take the rook, there's knight takes e8. Attacking the queen, the rook can come into d7 or maybe d8. That's just horrible for black. If you put a rook on f8 now, then it's queen c4 with a check. White covers the f7 square, so there's not even the possibility to block with your with one of your pieces. So that was just a 25 move crushing victory for Fabiano Caruana. Very exciting. We don't often get to see such miniatures, but very impressively played. I hope you like this game. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and let me know, of course, your thoughts on this game or anything else, what's happening in the Sinquefield Cup. Curious to hear from you guys. Let me know, and I'll be back very soon with more coverage of the latest top tournaments. Either it's the Sinquefield Cup or the Hans Niemann journey in Europe, because he's playing a tournament right now, but there's much more to come from him very soon. Stay tuned.